Ah, Ghostbusters. If ever a movie plot lent itself to the idea for a video game, certainly Ghostbusters would be an easy setup. Four guys start a paranormal investigation program in New York that culminates in literally chasing down and catching live ghosts and storing them, for a fee, of course. But the Ghostbusters relationship with video games has been a bit complicated over the years since the film's release. Some of the games were better than others, while some were just plain bad. In this episode, we'll set out to see if any Ghostbusters games truly live up to the awesomeness of the original film, or if they suffer the same curse as most other games based on movies. It's Games Based on Ghostbusters this week on Friday Night Arcade. Well, you can't go back any further than this. Ghostbusters on Commodore 64. This was developed by the great David Crane of Activision. Crane was responsible for games like A Boy and His Blob and Pitfall, and the Commodore 64 version of Ghostbusters is actually quite good for the time. At a glance, these 1984 graphics certainly look primitive, and the shots are probably inducing traumatizing visions of the horrible NES version. So, okay, the version of Ghostbusters on NES is a terrible mess. We can get that out of the way right now. The Commodore 64 version, though, is pretty darn great. Let's take a minute to appreciate the title screen. It plays the Ghostbusters theme in that way that only a Commodore 64 can, and there's even a little sing-along to this. Every time you press the spacebar, you get... yeah. So the premise here is that the Ghostbusters have expanded to other cities and you're in charge of their new franchise in some new unnamed city. This at least explains why you have to buy your equipment and even the car. The game opens with you at the shop buying all the stuff you need. Okay, so what worked best for me was just buying the hearse. It's a bit more expensive, but you can also carry more gear on it. Then just buy one of everything else you can afford except for the portable containment unit. You need to buy the ghost bait, the ghost PK meter, the image intensifier, the marshmallow sensor, and the ghost vacuum, and then as many traps as you can afford after that. Yeah, so you're operating a forklift here and then literally just throwing all of this stuff on top of Ecto-1. Alright, well I got my marshmallow sensor, some ghost bait, a giant vacuum cleaner just sitting on the hood. Break up the fog hat and let's go catch some ghosts, son! I love how as soon as you start the game, the theme kicks in and then you know it's about to get real. Oh yeah, I ain't afraid of no ghosts. So the game starts off in an overhead view of the city and you're looking for buildings that are flashing in red. As soon as you see one of those, move the Ghostbusters symbol toward it and then you can drive a very large and cool looking graphical representation of Ecto-1 to the building. And hey, remember the ghost vacuum that you purchased? If you pass over any of these ghosts in the streets called roamers, you can literally suck them up with your ghost vacuum. Then you have to catch Slimer by deploying a ghost trap, and this can be a little tricky because you have to drop the trap, then you're controlling the first Ghostbuster, so move him over to the left, but then you're controlling the second Ghostbuster, so position him over to the right. Basically, you just want to try to funnel Slimer towards the trap, and once he's over it, you can open the trap and catch him. But keep in mind, you only get one shot at this, otherwise you'll get slimed. And oh yeah, don't cross the streams. So that's basically what you do in this game. Drive around catching Slimers and vacuuming up ghosts. You do get paid $800 every time you catch a Slimer, and also sometimes the gatekeeper or keymaster shows up. Don't let them get to the Zool building. I love how apparently every city just has a Zool building in it for some reason. If your traps get full, you'll have to head back to HQ to empty them out. Early on, things will seem pretty laid back, but as the game progresses and the city's PK energy starts to get higher, stuff starts going haywire and you'll have more and more ghosts showing up all over the place. Eventually, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man shows up and you'll have to deploy some ghost bait to keep him from destroying buildings. Your whole score in this game is based on how many ghosts you can catch and get paid for versus how much damage is caused by Mr. Stay Puft. The graphics for the time are pretty dang good, and there's even a part at the end where you have to get past Mr. Stay Puft in order to beat the game. If you finish the game with more than $10,000, which is what you started with, then you get to start over next time with a higher credit limit. This is actually a pretty ingenious way to help add some replay value to the game, and it gives you incentive to play again since you can go back and buy better vehicles as well as the portable storage facility, which saves you trips back to HQ to empty out your ghost traps. There were other iterations of this game on various computer systems of the time, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, and they all had varying degrees of quality. There's a version of this on Sega Master System with highly improved graphics and sound, but it's essentially the same game. Like I said before, there's also the awful NES version. The driving sequences take way longer than in the original, and you can lose money by hitting other vehicles, and you could even run out of fuel. The graphics seem way worse somehow, and the whole ending sequence is unnecessarily difficult and tacked on. But hopefully that won't stop you from at least taking a look at the original Commodore 64 version. They did something pretty neat here given the time that this was released. Fast forward to 1987, and we get an arcade cabinet from Data East, the Real Ghostbusters, based on the Saturday morning cartoon series of the same name. It's a top-down shoot-'em-up, and up to 3 players could team up and pump quarters into this thing. Well, it's a game, I guess. Your character shoots what could loosely be described as a proton pack. The levels all kinda look the same. None of the monsters really have anything to do with ghosts from the movie or the show, and the hit detection is pretty bad. You can get power-ups for your proton pack, but they don't last very long because it's an arcade game and it's designed to gobble up quarters. I guess there's a reskinned version of this game released in Japan called the Kyu Hunter G, although to be honest, I'm not sure which version came first, the Japanese version or the US version. Neither of them are all that remarkable though, which is surprising considering Data East usually is one of my favorite companies, but I can't really recommend this one unless you're just really bored. Moving along to 1989, and things start to get a little weird. Ghostbusters II was just released in the theaters, and then we got 2 different versions of Ghostbusters II for the NES. First, let's take a look at the Activision version that was released worldwide that same year. It follows the events of the movie where Vigo the Carpathian from The Painting is trying to take over New York City.
Only a Carpathian would come back to life now and choose New York.
It's a side-scrolling shooter, and, well, it's bad. Your character is tiny, the hit detection is terrible, and there's a blitzkrieg of nonsensical ghosts and things out to kill you. Right out of the gate, the game doesn't play fair because you'd think you're supposed to go to the right, but instead there's just this little spider thing that you can't kill coming at you, so you have to know that you're supposed to go to the left and avoid the spider. I wonder how many cheap deaths there have been just from this one game enemy. Okay, so the spider is supposed to be kind of like a timer to make sure you don't take too long getting through the level, but it's still pretty annoying. To deal with all of these ghosts, you've got your slime gun with the positively charged slime from the movie, as well as ghost traps. If you manage to get through that, there's a driving stage where you're just jumping Ecto-1 over all of these giant potholes in the road and shooting or avoiding as many ghosts as you can. I guess later in the game you get to operate the Statue of Liberty just like in the movie, but I wouldn't know because this game is hard as hell and not in the fun way. I will say the music is the best version of the Ghostbusters theme I've heard so far, but otherwise, avoid this one at all costs unless you're just a total masochist. Okay, I promise there are a couple of good Ghostbusters games to get to eventually, but we at least gotta mention this one. So I present to you 1993's The Real Ghostbusters on Game Boy. This was developed by Kimco, who also handled the NES ports of the MacVenture series that I really loved. The music actually does sound like it came from a Kimco game. Kimco games always had a very specific sound to them that I've just never really heard anything else quite like it. Unfortunately, that's where the positives for this game end. You play as Peter Venkman, and you're going around these maze-like dungeons trying to find stars so you can open doors and proceed to the next level. You can use the proton pack to shoot blocks at your feet, and you'll need to find bombs in order to kill enemies. If none of that sounds like Ghostbusters, well, you'd be right, because despite the fact that this is called The Real Ghostbusters, it's just a reskin of one of the Japanese Mickey Mouse Crazy Castles games. They even reskinned this as a Garfield game in other PAL regions. I feel really bad for anyone that got scammed into buying this thinking they were getting an actual Ghostbusters game on their Game Boy. Here's one that a lot of people don't even know exists. Ghostbusters on Sega Genesis? This was put together by Compile and released in 1990. The story here finds the Ghostbusters down on their luck again after the events of the first movie. That is until a giant hole straight to hell opens up in New York, and now all of these ghosts are coming out. This is a side-scrolling platforming shoot-'em-up with levels that are spread out and non-linear and go in all sorts of different directions. You've got 4 levels to choose from, and then a 5th and final level opens up after you defeat all of them. So the mission here is that you're exploring these levels looking for ghosts to catch. There are mid-boss ghosts as well as final original bosses, and you have to keep looking around until you find them, and then you have to defeat them as well as actually catch them in the ghost trap. If you mess up, the ghost gets away, and then you have to find them again. You find cash throughout the levels, and you can also get a sizable portion of cash for clearing out a level, at which time you'll have a chance to buy power-ups and health refills. Your special items can be accessed through a menu when you're in a level, and you'll want to experiment and see what works best in a given situation or on a specific boss. The big selling point with this game is just the goofy, over-the-top graphics, specifically the wacky, oversized heads on the Ghostbusters themselves. You can play as any of the Ghostbusters except for Winston for some reason, and dang it, why doesn't Winston ever get any love? This game is really challenging, but also pretty fun. Like I said, I really like the graphics, and the music is, for the most part, pretty good too. As far as I know, there aren't any official ports of this game that can be purchased anywhere though, and it's pretty expensive to buy a physical copy on the secondhand market, but it's definitely worth checking out if you can find a way to play it. Okay, I mentioned a bit ago that there was a second game based on Ghostbusters 2 released on the NES as well. So, here it is. They literally just called it New Ghostbusters 2. That's sorta awesome. So this was put together by HAL Laboratory, and if you're in North America and have never seen this before, well, that's because it was only released in Japan as well as PAL territories. You can play as any of the 4 Ghostbusters, and in the NES version, you can also play as Louis Tully. There was technically a version of this for the Game Boy as well, although I don't think it had as many levels. It's top-down action where you'll control one of the Ghostbusters while a second Ghostbuster follows behind you. You have to zap the ghost with your proton pack, which stuns it by pressing the A button, and then if you quickly press the B button, the second character will deploy a trap and catch the ghost. The ghost doesn't stay stunned for very long though, and this can be a little tricky because the second character just follows you around in the exact path you've taken around the room. It doesn't have any sort of AI or anything like that, meaning he could be facing the wrong direction when you go to deploy the trap. It just takes some getting used to, and I guess technically a second player is able to take control of the second character, but the only thing they can do is press B on the second controller to deploy the trap. They can't actually physically move the character around, and he's still just locked into following the first character, so that's unfortunate. This could have been really cool as a 2-player game. Still though, this is a pretty unique take on the idea, and I want to spend some more time with this. It kind of reminds me of Sweet Home on the NES, although there's not really any puzzles to solve or items to find. You're literally just going around catching ghosts until an arrow appears telling you to go to the next area, so it's not as fleshed out or as complex as it could have been, but it's pretty neat nonetheless, and definitely worth checking out. And we saved the best for last, Ghostbusters the video game, developed by Terminal Reality and released by Atari in 2009. This also got an HD remaster a few years ago, and this is Ghostbusters. For everyone that complained that you never got a true Ghostbusters 3 with the original cast, this is totally for you. Ghostbusters the video game reunites all of the original cast, minus Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis. That's right, everybody's back. Ernie Hudson, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, and Bill Murray all lend their voices to their characters, and there's a whole new story here and everything. They even brought back William Atherton to play Walter Peck, the slimy EPA guy from the first movie. You play as a nameless, newly hired Ghostbuster who follows along with the rest of the team as they go on a brand new adventure. The story was written in part by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis and has all sorts of zany twists and turns, as well as a lot of really fun callbacks to the original movies.
Wasn't me this time, I swear it.
Want to go bust Slimer at the Sedgwick Hotel? That's in there. Always wanted to fight Mr. Stay Puft from the top of a skyscraper? Hey, that's in here too. Heck, they even brought back Max von Sydow to voice Vigo, and the painting is just sitting there at Ghostbusters HQ. You can talk to him and he says weird stuff in spooky Vigo voice. It's really funny.
Please stop burning the microwave popcorn.
If this had been an actual movie, it would probably be criticized for having too many callbacks to the originals, but as a game they could take some liberties with this and give you a new story while also including such memorable callbacks to the films. After all, this was probably the only time a Ghostbusters video game was going to get this much attention, so I feel like it's a good thing that they gave you a chance to replay some of these classic moments. But these moments also tie into the new story nicely, and I don't want to say too much else about the story for those that have never played it. But like I said, this game is basically Ghostbusters 3. Gameplay is an over-the-shoulder shooter, and they get a lot of things right here. Using the proton pack is exactly what I thought using a proton pack would be like. What else can you say? It's awesome. The beam whips and winds around the room, and you can snag ghosts with it as well as do some damage to walls and objects. Now, this game was made in 2009, so they hadn't quite perfected duck and cover mechanics in over-the-shoulder perspective games, but you can do this little sidestep maneuver and, I mean, it works good enough. You can deploy traps to catch ghosts, and there's also really cool power-ups and add-ons for your proton pack. This is also a horror game at heart. In a fun way, they incorporated these sequences where you have to put on the goggles that Ray had in the movies, and you're searching around dark corridors. All sorts of fun jump scares as you're making your way through some of these haunted areas. It's really cool. And if you ever wanted to know the backstory on some of these ghosts that you see in the films, you can scan them with your goggles and queue up little read-throughs in Tobin's Spirit Guide. Remember the librarian ghost at the beginning of the first movie? Yeah, she's in here, and a really big deal. She's just about more powerful and harder to defeat than the final boss, and there's a whole convoluted backstory for her. Anyway, I can't say enough good things about the 2009 Ghostbusters game. The whole game is about 8 hours long, and that's probably just the right length. It feels like playing through a long movie and tagging along with the Ghostbusters. This serves as a perfect last ride with the original cast, and that's especially more meaningful now with the tragic passing of Harold Ramis. Well, that's it for this week. Which one of these was your favorite Ghostbusters game of all time? What are some other movie franchise tie-ins that you'd like to see me cover here on the channel at some point? From the Friday Night Arcade family to yours, I hope you have a Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays or whatever it is that you celebrate. As always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.